Hey everyone, my name is Ron Keck. I'm the owner of SubCat Music Studios in Syracuse, New York. A few months ago, we had a good friend of ours, Chuck Sheely from Making Music magazine, approach us about doing a series of videos for those who are interested in learning a little bit more about what we do as recording artists or recording engineers. And so I'm going to take this opportunity and hopefully give you a little bit of insight knowledge as to how we approach our recordings. And one big thing to understand that most of what we do is opinion, so take it for whatever it's worth. Our first approach here is going to be talking a little bit about SubCat Studios and why we do what we do with the space that we have. And so number one, SubCat's been going probably for now about 20 years or so. It was a 2-year designing phase and then a 2-year actual build, so it was 4 years of designing and building. So a lot of people have always asked why going to the degree that we had gone to, why do something like that? Well, one, we had the resources to be able to do that, so when we set out to design this place, we wanted to do it acoustically first. Okay, now a lot of people they don't have the luxury that we have with well-designed acoustic spaces. We have Studio A, B, and C, and all of them can operate simultaneously without having any kind of interference whatsoever. So obviously the acoustics play a factor, and also not to mention that you want to have some neutral spaces to be able to record in. And the reason being, at least in our opinion, is that when you get into multiple tracks, you want to be able to start at the highest level with each track, because cumulatively, as you add to your track count, you can also add a noise problem or degradations of your tracks become more evident. Right? So acoustically, you want to start at that highest level, and as you start adding tracks, then obviously the acoustics are going to become more of a factor. And that was the whole reason we decided to go with this crazy build. The downside of that is, whatever you do in terms of your microphones or mic preamps, those also have to be at that highest level as well. So you can't just go into a beautiful recording studio such as like SubCat Studios, have these beautiful rooms, and then put in $60, $70 microphones and cheap cables, cheap preamps, because now you're negating the acoustics. So again, it was kind of a double-edged sword for us to go down this path. Through these series, I'm going to talk about not only the acoustics, obviously, but we'll get into some details in terms of EQing and some compression, and again, how we approach our mix. A lot of times our interns, when they come to us, one of the most important ingredients that we try to push is the ability to manage your session. Okay, so that's number one. We're going to talk a little bit about that right now. It's not uncommon to have 6-member bands, 7-member bands. We've had 13-member bands come in here, and the problem with that is the obvious, which is the more you add to your tracking session, the more chaotic it becomes. Okay, so you want to be able to be in control of your session. And so I always tell my interns that let's get into a methodical approach when we start our tracking sessions. Number one, start with your lowest common denominator, which is usually your percussion, your rhythm tracks. Okay, so we get into a habit of starting with our kick drum, snare drum, our overheads, hi-hat, toms 1, 2, and 3, and then room mics. And I usually do it in that order all the time. So when a band comes in here, the first thing I'm going to do is concentrate on the drummer. Okay, so we get the drummer situated, and then again, and I do it that way all the time. Every time I do a tracking session, I'll start with the rhythm tracks. And then 2, I'll start going to my melodic tracks, guitars, keyboards, and then vocals. There's been many times where you might have a breakdown in the chain. Let's say your microphone's not working on the guitar track, and you're able to troubleshoot much faster if you methodically take approach with your sessions. Basically the reason why I like to do it the same way all the time. Once you get your tracking session mic'd up and ready to go, then obviously it's time to get some levels. And again, I'll start with the drums, kick drum, snare, overheads left and right, hi-hat, toms 1, 2, and 3, and I'll go in that order. And then I'll bring in the bass, and then I'll bring in the guitars, and we'll develop a level to start with. Okay, now obviously once the band starts playing and they get comfortable with it, then the levels have a tendency to get a little bit more crazy, and you just have to pay attention to what's going on. But once you methodically take that approach all the time, you're able to troubleshoot get to the levels that you need to quickly without having a problem. Headphone monitor, absolutely critical. I can't tell you how many times we've had situations where in the early days we used to do cue mixes. Basically, we would set the mix and we would send it to the to the folks that are needing headphone mixes. And a lot of times each person needs to have a little bit more of this and that, and by the time you get crazy with your headphone mixes, you got chaos again. A lot of people are complaining they can't hear themselves. So now we've gone to a new system with our studio, and we kind of refer to it as the Me Mix, and it's basically that's a little sub mixer for each person, and each person can have their own mix, if you will. So that works out much nicer. So we don't really do much cue mix in the initial track session. So once your headphone mixes are established, then we're on our way of starting our songs. And basically, I don't do much processing going into the tracking phase. I try to let the musicians respond naturally to what they're hearing. And sometimes there may be a situation where you might have to put a little bit of compression on somebody because they're not in control of what they're doing with their instruments. But for the most part, we allow the dynamics to swing and let the musicians learn how to deal with that as they're tracking. So again, the processing is very little in the initial tracking stage. Once you get done tracking, then it's a matter of compiling your edits. Then you get into a situation where you might want to edit one phrase to another phrase. And before you even get to that point, what's critical is you want to be able to establish the idea of either playing to a click or not playing to a click. Now, the problem is most people that don't play to a click, the editing becomes a little bit more demanding, it's more of a challenge, basically. I like to use drum machines. Now, a lot of times I refer to this as locking everything into a grid. You want to have good files management at this point in time. Right? In other words, labeling the beginning of a tracking session, where those files are actually going when you're tracking is critical. I mean, you're going to be prompted at the beginning, at least in Pro Tools, and I think most of the DAWs out there are going to prompt you where to put these files. Absolutely critical, because who knows, maybe they want to take the track somewhere else they have mixed, so you want to be as organized as you possibly can. So understand whether we're going to lock this stuff into grid, where those files are going are absolutely important. Now, as far as like a click track goes, and as I said, I like to use a drum machine. It's been many times where we get a drummer, if the click has got a slow quarter note, a lot of space between the quarter note, we'd like to subdivide. And a lot of times I'll use a drum machine to create the subdivision, and it helps the drummer and the rest of the band have a better idea of what it's actually going to sound like, because you're giving them an actual drum beat through a drum machine, you know what I mean? So you're going to find yourself that's going to be much better. Once that is established, then it's just a matter of getting the takes that are going to work. Now, a lot of times I always will tell the client, I'll ask the question, okay, out of the 3 or 4 takes that we just accomplished and that you've sat down and listened to them, which one is actually going to be the working take? If you're locked into a grid, it's real easy to take a verse from take 1, say, and a chorus from take 3 and main them up and have no problems once you're locked into a grid. So that's how critical having a grid established with the band can be when playing into it. And again, at this point in time, we really don't do much processing. We're just basically getting everybody on the same page with the performance side of it. Very important that we established a common ground. And again, I do this methodically every time I do a tracking session. So we're not guessing at all whatsoever. Once we get things rolling here and the band is feeling comfortable working with you, a lot of times if you're communicating with the band and you're enjoying yourself and the band is enjoying themselves, chances are the band's going to loosen up to the point where they're going to start asking you for your opinion. So it's always difficult to get started with the band, but once you break that ice, then it's just now you've got a working relationship going, okay? And the chances are they're going to ask for your opinion. And it's like I have a good friend of ours who also does some engineering work here. He uses the term pulling the same rope, and I think that's a perfect analogy. I think the bottom line is that the band wants to have the best product as well as an engineer. The engineer is also going to want to have the best product as well. So pulling the same rope is a perfect analogy for that.